Okay, today we are going to talk about microphones, design and application. This is going to be a part one of two parts. So let's dive in. Okay, so a microphone is a device that converts acoustic energy into corresponding electrical voltages that can be amplified or recorded. So that's your definition of what a microphone is. Hopefully everybody in here knows what a microphone is or has a general idea. So there are generally three types of microphones that are the most popular. Dynamic, ribbon, and condenser. Okay, and we're going to talk about those three today. So the dynamic mic. Here's a little picture of some common dynamic mics. Dynamic mic is a type of microphone in which the sound waves cause a movable wire or coil to vibrate in a magnetic field and thus induce a current. So if we look at the actual dynamic mic, this is the element. So if you picture this right here, okay? This would be like the top of a 57. Now, this is pretty much the entire microphone. If we wanted to just have an XLR jack at the end of this, this could be a 57. The reason why, so you see this right here, you know it's 57. The reason why it has this elongated spot, so you put in a mic clip or hold it in your hand. But if we wanted to, like, there's a little transformer in here, but most of this is not wasted space, but just like a handle. So it could just be that small spot. So here's how a dynamic mic works, or at least the parts of it. So if you're working from the top up here, so you have your windscreen, you have a diaphragm, so that's just a film that moves in relation with acoustic waves. Then you have your coil. So this is what actually will vibrate and create the electromagnetic current. And then you got your magnet core and your capsule. Okay, so technically this whole thing is a capsule right here. This whole thing up to basically this part would be considered the capsule, but basically the capsule houses these parts right here. And then you got your windscreen on the bottom, so that would be like this right here. And then, like I said, you have a transformer inside that handle. Then you have your XLR output. Okay. Just as a side note, dynamic any mics really of any kind can be modified. So for instance, I have a 57 that I've modified by taking out the transformer, and it gives it a little bit more low end, great for snare drum, and honestly, I use it on electric guitar, great for that as well. Just a little side note there. But I'm going to talk about some common dynamic mic staples. Now, first of all, dynamic mics are rugged. They really hold up very well. They're not super easily broken. So for that reason, when you're doing any kind of application, but especially on live sound applications, they are great. So, for a speaker, like a person talking, to miking up instruments, to vocalists, they're great. So here's some staples. So the number one, And I put this as kind of like a 1A, 1B. It's going to be your Shure SM57, which is right here, and your SM58, which is right here. So SM58/57. Okay. Now, these are around $100 each. Okay. So one thing you'll notice is dynamic mics are typically a bit cheaper than your ribbon and condenser mics. That being said, there are always exceptions to that rule. But these are high quality dynamic mics, and they're $100, which is relatively cheap when you talk about microphones. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the common uses for a 57, vocals basically is what a 58 is made for. It's made for vocals. But you can use it on any of these other things. And it's going to sound pretty similar to the 57. There are people out there that will tell you they're the exact same capsule, except for one's got a windscreen. We're going to look at the frequency response here in a minute, and you'll see there actually is a bit of a difference in the frequency response, but they're going to sound pretty similar. So, but snare drum for a 57, top and bottom snare, electric guitar, percussion, even vocals for 57. I mean, you can pretty much put it on anything that it's going to be like loud or have very high transients. They work very well on. Anything with mid-range, a lot of mid-range. So let's go ahead and look at the frequency response. So the frequency response charts are basically a representation of what the microphone picks up in what frequencies. So you can see this is the relative response in dBs. Okay, so that's like kind of, if you were looking at this like an EQ, for instance, this would be your representation of it. But this is it's basically like the character of the microphone, if you want to call it that. So SM57, you'll see, has a natural bass roll-off, high-pass filter type thing right here. And then it has a small dip in 300 to 400 to 500 hertz, that right around there. That's your low mids. And you can see on the 58, that doesn't have that much of a dip right there, as much as the 57. And then you have the same kind of curve up in your high mids, where it has a bump right there. And you can see on the 58, it's a little bit different bump. On this little EQ'd, a little harsher right here compared to here. But you can kind of see the representation of how this microphone picks up. So this little dip right here is one of the reasons why it's great for snare drum, electric guitar, because it basically naturally EQs your source. All right. Next one, your Sennheiser MD421. I could talk a little bit about the companies too. So Shure is an American company, one of the first microphone companies. AKG, Sennheiser here is a German company. So the MD421 is great for electric guitars again, but is the go-to usually in recording applications for toms, but it sounds great on snare drum, percussion, even bass guitar, vocal. So we'll look at this frequency response for the MD421. You'll see it has a kind of a similar roll off as the 57, but then is really flat all the way up until the mids up here, the high mids, and then has a little bit of bump, 2 to 5K around there, and then rolls off from 10 to 20. So this is again good for anything that you don't really need a a lot of high-end detail on. So it's great for, like I said, toms, electric guitar, um, percussion, And then let's go to the next one. Shure SM7B. This is becoming the staple broadcast microphone, but anything that your voice sounds good talking through is also going to be an amazing vocal mic for recording vocals. So vocal, percussion, guitar, electric guitar. So this is basically my main staple microphone in my home studio. Sounds amazing on vocals. I will occasionally use it on electric guitar because it has more bottom end than like a 57, and it's a little bit flatter than a 57. So in certain applications, I'll use this. And then, for snare drum, makes it sound big and fat. A kick drum even. A lot of times I'll use it for a kit mic that will sit basically like at the side of the snare. It's just an amazing dynamic mic. Sounds good on just about anything. And then you have your Electro Voice RA20. This basically in the 90s, I believe it was made 80s, maybe late 70s. But by the 90s, this was the broadcast staple microphone, but also, like I just said, anything that sounds good for broadcast is going to sound amazing on vocals. So this has been a vocal mic, but percussion, a lot of people use it for kick drum. You can use it on snare. Honestly, bass guitar sounds great because this kind of has even similar to the SM7B, but it just has a little bit more low end than like a 57. But here's a frequency response. And I was going to tell you guys this too. These little dotted lines and secondary lines here, those are all like a description of the high pass switches and mid boost switches. So like on this 57, it has two switches. It has a high pass, which rolls off the lows. So that's the frequency response for that engaged. And then it has a mid boost, which that's the frequency response for the mid boost if you were to turn that switch on. All right, the next dynamic mic staple is the Sennheiser MD441. This one is not unique, but different from the other ones because it is a supercardioid pattern. I don't need you to worry about that very much right now, about the different patterns, because we are going to go over that in part 2, but I just want to differentiate this one a little bit. And so because of that supercardioid pattern, it has a really good feedback rejection and isolation. So, it's great on vocals. It's great on toms, snare percussion. This one is used for, this one, I believe it was made in the 70s. I definitely have seen people using it in the 70s. But it is just a recording staple for a different option for a vocal or toms, mostly. The next type of microphone is a ribbon mic. So in this microphone, it uses a thin electrically conductive ribbon, typically made of aluminum, and is placed between two poles of a magnet to produce a voltage by electromagnetic induction. So ribbon mics are typically bidirectional, meaning, and again, we're not going to super worry about that, but you just know that the typical one is going to be bidirectional right now. And then, so they pick up sounds from equally well from either side. And then when we look at some common ones, I'll denote which ones are not that bidirectional. So here's a ribbon element. So you'll see that's the actual ribbon right there. This one's probably aluminum. And then you have your magnets on either side. Okay. So instead of a coil like a dynamic has, this one has a ribbon element. Here is a representation of it here. Here's your ribbon, diaphragm, magnet pole pieces on the side, and then the electrical leads come out into your XLR or transformer or whatever is next in the circuit. Okay, common ribbon staples. So RCA is a company. Basically used to make all kind of electronics. One of the first ribbon mics was this RCA 44. Now there's a company called AEA now, and you can see they're kind of trying to take a bit of the cues from the logo there, but the AEA company is kind of remaking these RCA microphones have been long out of production. So AEA is kind of making some new versions of those. So just keep that in mind. So their ribbon microphones are going to typically be probably a little more expensive than dynamic microphones that you'll see, but an AEA for a ribbon microphone, $1,100. That's for me. That's a high-end ribbon microphone for a decent price. There are definitely more experienced ones or more expensive ones, but we'll look at the frequency response of this one. One thing you'll notice about ribbons is they have usually have good bass response, and then will sometimes not have a roll off in the highs. So the commonality of a ribbon microphone is usually it's going to be what's considered warmer sounding or a little darker than your other kind of microphones. So, sounds good on this particular one. Sounds good on vocal. Really, drum overheads and drum rooms are where these kind of shine, or like piano, percussion, things like that. The next kind is the Coles 4038. This is a British company, and these have been around forever, and they're still making them. This was the basically the BBC microphone. They kind of had a hand in producing this microphone. You can get it for around $1,500. So again, not super expensive for a ribbon, but yeah, this is kind of where the high-end ribbons live. The new ones that are made around the $1,500, $1,000 price point, which I would love to have a bunch of these. It can get kind of expensive, but here is the frequency response for the 4038. You see it's pretty flat, has good bass response, has that dip that we're talking about, so it's a little darker, but it has a high mid bump. It's very great for drum overheads if you have kind of bright cymbals or any kind of percussion or acoustic guitar. It's just a great microphone. The next one is the Beyerdynamic M160. This is a double ribbon mic, and it is a supercardioid. This one's kind of made famous by Eddie Kramer in the '60s. He used this to record like Jimi Hendrix guitar in his vocal. Let's look at the frequency response here. Very high in the mid range and or in the low mids and lows. Then it cuts down. So it has some switches here. So it can also be like pretty flat, right? So that's probably the one I would use right there, that setting. All right, next one, Royer R121. Uh, this is a American company. Got its start. He's been around definitely since the 90s. But you can see the frequency response here. Has a good amount of low end. Has a bit of a dip in the mid range. When you get up into the upper mids, it has a little bit of a bump and then tails back off. This is the staple for electric guitar along with a 57. If you want like a typical Nashville setup for electric guitar, you would have the Royer R121 set up alongside a 57 on a guitar amp, and the Royer is giving you all the low end, and or it just sounds like a more full picture. It has more low end, like I said, but also it just sounds a little bit fuller. And then the 57 is more directed. It has that high pass filter. It has that mid bump. It helps it to stick out of the mix. And then I wanted to give you guys one on here that wasn't at least $1,000 or $700. This is the ribbon mic I have. It's a Cascade Fathead. You'll see it has a low roll off to about 100. This is what I use along with my 57 for. So I have that 57 that has the transformer mod on it, so it gets a little bit more low end. This one it actually works with this one because this one has the roll off, and you can see it has a little bit of a boost there, around 600-700, and then it'll roll off once you get to about 10. But I've had very good success with this on my electric guitar. And this is, it's actually, Cascade is a bit of a staple in studios everywhere too. So not quite as popular as the other brands, but they make good stuff. Let's talk about the condenser mic. So a condenser mic is a microphone that uses electrostatic or capacitor technology to convert acoustic energy into electrical energy. Here is some Neumann microphones. These are all condensers, so basically any mic can come in any kind of shape, but condensers are not limited to one, kind of form factor. They just have to have that element. So let's talk about the element. You can see it through the windscreen here, but this is a condenser capsule. So you have your diaphragm in this front plate, and then you have your back plate, and then this will go down to your transformers and everything else that are in the body of the microphone. All right, let's talk about some common condenser staples. We'll start with large diaphragm. Large diaphragm meaning the diaphragm here is a bit larger than what we're going to see on what's called the small diaphragm condenser microphones. So the three most popular Neumanns, these are all very popular, and you'll even see different brands make different copies of all of these microphones. So there's many different brands that make copies of all these. So when you see the price of them in the next slide, you don't have to get super shocked, but original, or straight from Neumann, they still make the U87. They don't think they make the U47 anymore, and I don't think they make the U67. So, but these mics are amazing for vocals. U47 is actually a tube mic, so I have a tube in it that makes it warm and has really good high-end detail. It's just a great microphone. U67 and U87 are in the same vein, have different frequency response for sure. But vocal, acoustic guitar, overhead, strings, percussion, anything, the Beatles used 47 on their guitar, in some recordings, like you use it on pretty much anything. So let's look at the frequency responses. This is a 47, 67, and this is 87. So you'll see 47 has great flat response, has a little bit of bump in the high mids, and kind of tails off. 67 kind of a similar thing, has a little bit more of a roll off. Not as much low end, not as good on the low end, and then has that high mid coming in, kind of verging on high. So it has all this is elevated, so it has a little bit more mids than the 47, and then the U87 is pretty flat until you get into the high mids. It has a pretty big bump here when it gets into the high mids. Next one, AKG 414. It is a staple in recording situations for vocals, for overheads, acoustic guitar, toms, obviously strings, percussion, anything like that. I've had the pleasure of using these a lot, and I love them on anything. But they're great because they have a flat response, and again, these are like the different switches here. These would be those, but this is just set up for just flat, and it has very accurate detail, and then it has this dip, which is great for like a harsh vocal, or a hard, that's why it's good on guitar. It has a little to make it sound smoother, and then it has a good bump up in the high mids and into the highs. It captures high detail very, very well. And AKG and Neumann are both German companies, so you'll see that really the German companies and then the American companies all had really good microphone companies, and then later on you'd start to see like Japan companies come out with really good stuff, the Roland stuff and everything. But the next one, Sony. This one is a C800. This has a tube in it. It's very good for. It's good for vocal. It's good for strings. You can see the price tag on it, $1,100 or $11,000. It's a little expensive, but this is kind of the quintessential rap, hip hop mic. It has very fast response. So this is one that like Dr. Dre uses and Eminem uses. They all use this guy. But again, you'll see on a lot of these more expensive ones that different companies make copies of these. So Warm Audio is a company that makes a pretty accurate copy of this for around $1,000. So if you're looking for that tone, it is accessible under that $11,000 price point. But here's frequency response for this one. We're just going to focus on this guy right here. So this is just straight at a source. You see it's pretty flat. It has all these little bumps and cuts. And this particular frequency response just sounds really good for fast talking broadcasts or audiobook situation, voiceover, and amazing for your rap, R&B, hip hop type thing. Next one is the Telefunken 251. This is actually a tube mic as well. Amazing for vocals, has very good high end, as you'll see. It has a bump in the high end. That's why some people like it for vocals. And it has a good roll off, has dips where you would want them. It is $11,000, but again, even that company that I just talked about, Warm Audio, makes one for around $1,000 as well. We're going to go to small diaphragm now. Biggest difference is obviously the diaphragm is a lot smaller. It fits in a smaller form factor. So typically, these are all going to be used for kind of the same things, but the KM84 is great on acoustic guitar, overheads, percussion, toms, electric guitar, even strings. I've been fortunate enough to work with quite a few of these, and they were kind of my overhead go-tos. I would either use the 414s or these, and I've recorded acoustic guitar with them. They sound great. These are my favorite small diaphragm condensers for sure. And again, they can be a bit expensive, but companies make copies of them. That Warm Audio company makes one for under $500. So that's a very good price and a very good mic that you're getting for that money. So it's a couple of different ones. AKG 451. You see they still make this one. It's a little less expensive. It's pretty flat. It has a good bump at the high end, good for detail. And the Shure SM81 is just a really good flat response small diaphragm condenser. And you can see that price point is not as high either. All right, so that is part one of microphone design and application, and we'll do part two next week.